Good evening. My name is Michelle Stempian, the Education and Community Programs Manager at the Holland Museum, and I use the pronouns she and her. Thank you for joining us for what is certainly a timely and welcome conversation. Tonight's program is part of the Holland Museum's ongoing Cultural Lens series. This series is sponsored by Spectrum Health Zeeland Hospital and Warner Norcross and Judd, with additional support from the Holland Zeeland Community Foundation and Herman Miller Cares. We are also grateful to have the continued support from the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts. A few announcements before we begin. This program is being recorded, so we ask that you stay on mute throughout the event. If you have questions for our speakers, please put them in the chat and we will share them at the end of the program. In a day or two, you will receive an email with a link to the recording and an online survey. Please take a few moments to complete the survey and be sure to let us know of any topics that would be of interest for future programs. I just want to highlight some upcoming programs and activities at the museum. Our current special exhibition, Matthias Alton Beyond the Oil Paintings, is on view until July 25th and features Alton's unique pieces of watercolors and sketches from the Grand Valley State University Art Gallery collection. Our final program in support of the exhibition will be on Thursday, July 15th. Join West Michigan artist Barbara Carlson for a drawing demonstration and then the opportunity to spend the evening drawing on plein air. Our next Cultural Lens program will be Thursday, July 29th at 7 p.m. This free virtual program will feature Stacy Trowbridge and Kristen Myers of Disability Network Lakeshore, and they will discuss what a disability is and how the environment and our common assumptions shape our perceptions of disability. We hope you will join us for that, and you can register through our website. Summer is in full swing at the Holland Museum. The museum's current hours are Monday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 to 5 p.m. We are always open the second Monday of the month in the evening from 4 to 7 for free. Our next second Monday is July 12th. Spark Lab is now open on Mondays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And so bring the family or just yourself to come and create and explore. The Capon and Settlers Houses are now open again for tours by appointment on Fridays and Saturdays from 11 to 3 throughout the summer. On Saturday, July 10th, join us for our old-fashioned ice cream social. For more on these programs, as well as summer walking tours, check out our website or sign up for our online newsletter or follow us on social media. So on to tonight's program. It is my privilege to introduce our presenters for this evening. Jeffrey Sorensen is the first director for Out on the Lakeshore, a Holland-based LGBTQ+ center, where he was instrumental in the city passing a comprehensive non-discrimination ordinance. He is a Grand Valley State University graduate, where he earned a bachelor's in advertising and public relations. Specializing in media relations, Jeffrey has had content published in several local, regional, and national publications, and has served on several nonprofit boards, including the Wayland Area Chamber of Commerce, Delta Tau Delta Fraternities, LGBTQ+ Affinity Organization, and the Grand Rapids Young Professionals, where he is currently president and a founding member of its Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council. Sarah Showalter Van Tongeren is a licensed clinical social worker in the states of Michigan and Virginia. Sarah has had more than 12 years of clinical social work experience in settings such as private practice, foster care, inpatient hospitals, and outpatient medical clinics, domestic violence shelters, and behavioral health. She is the co-author to the book, The Courage to Suffer, which is published by Templeton Press and available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. Currently, she works in a private practice in Holland, Michigan, where she provides therapy to individuals to help them cultivate a sense of meaning and develop narratives of resilience following trauma and unexpected life events. Sarah specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, narrative therapy, brain spotting, acceptance commitment therapy, and liberation psychology, and she is an active member on the board at Out on the Lakeshore. Together, Sarah and Jeffrey each won the 2020 Social Justice Award given by the City of Holland for their work in helping to pass the city's first non-discrimination ordinance. And we are so thrilled they are here with us this evening to share the important history of Holland's LGBTQ plus community. Please welcome Sarah and Jeffrey. I'm going to stop sharing.
Great, thank you so much for having us. We are grateful to be here tonight. We first wanted to, we're recording from the lobby of Out on the Lakeshore. And we wanted to take a moment and honor the space that we are standing on right now, as well as honoring the people that have come before us so that we can sit here right now. So some of these people will be mentioned in tonight's presentation, but I wanted to take a special moment to honor the people that have gone on before us, like John Stout, people in the work that have made this possible, like Jen Adams, the professors at Hope College that have paved the way for students to be out and proud, like Jane Dickey and Dave Myers and Kristen Gray, and the community members who have been outspoken when before they could even be protected, like Karen Prinz. And it's because of all these people we are here today. And so we honor them as a part of this process too.
And a large portion of our presentation tonight will actually include interviews that we did with several of these people to really make sure that we capture those perspectives, because we can't tell the history ourselves, but the people who lived that history can tell it so much better than we can.
So let's begin. We're first gonna share with you our hope for tonight is that we can share both on a national level, but also a more local level. We can't include, just because there's not enough time, every story of everything we've ever heard, which is a lot. And actually, this is a part of the beginning. This has spurred hopefully more projects to come. So we will miss things. We do not pretend that this is an exhaustive list. But to honor that, we'll do the best we can. And to begin, we're going to start with the pre-1970s. And so during this time, I wanted to honor and name that two-spirit people, same-sex love has been a part of almost every culture and every continent since the beginning of time. This isn't a new thing. What's happening is we're finally having conversations and awareness and trying to destigmatize it. Also, during the civil rights movement, the awareness began burgeoning with Martin Luther King and his key organizer, Bayard Rustin. He was a gay man. It was the first American political-based demand for fair treatment that also included gays and lesbians in mental health, public policy, as well as employment.
So then in 1969, we had kind of our first big turning point for the LGBTQ plus community. And that was with June 28th in 1969, the Stonewall Uprising, where the Stonewall Inn in New York was a popular bar for the LGBT community and often was raided by the police. So one night when it was raided, the community fought back and said enough is enough. And it's important to mention that many of the people and those who were thought to throw the first brick also are believed to have been Black trans women. So then only a year later in 1970, the first LGBT centers were formed in Albany, New York. And then we also had the first Pride celebration on the anniversary of Stonewall. And then in the 1970s, we also had several LGBT organizations and other civil rights organizations begin to form throughout the country.
And this is when, in 1978, John Stout forms the first gay and lesbian student union at Hope College. So this is what was going on in a local level. That's our first, as far as we know, recorded date, time, event that has occurred. And then in 1980s, the AIDS epidemic took place. It was a giant setback for the LGBTQ individuals as far as increasing stigmatization, as well as how relating sexual activity with disease. And so it has been a giant thing that we're still fighting today. Currently, there's more than 1.1 million people living with HIV. And as since the epidemic, it has 700,000 people live with AIDS and have died since the beginning of epidemic. As a result, there were a lot of policies that were created that are still in effect, even they're somewhat outdated. The main one being the blood donation by the FDA is restricted. And this started then as a lifetime ban on any man who had sex with another man. And that occurred since 1977. The rule was, of course, intended to keep HIV out of the blood donation process. In 2015, that law was replaced with a year abstinence requirement. And then in 2020, because of COVID-19, it was replaced with a 3-month abstinence requirement. However, this law is still oppressive and outdated, but informed by the 1980s AIDS epidemic.
So then in 1983, more locally, Representative James Dressel, who was from Holland, actually co-sponsored a bill that would have amended the state's Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation as a protected civil right. Unfortunately, that bill died in the committee, but it really sparked an ongoing debate that was triggered then that really continues today. And there's a lot of conversations going on about the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act now.
And then in the 1990s, in 1993, President Bill Clinton at the time instated a don't ask, don't tell policy when it became into military service. And in 1993, sexual orientation more locally was added to Hope College's sexual harassment policy, stating you can't harass someone based on their sexual orientation. However, in 1995, Hope College created an institutional statement on homosexuality. That statement then stated the college will not provide recognition, financial, or logistical support for groups whose purposes include the advocacy or moral legitimization of homosexual behavior. The statement at the same time also advocates for fair and kind treatment of people who are homosexual orientation.
So then in the 90s at Hope College, we were also getting a lot of additional awareness being brought. And one of those events that happened was a Lesbi Gay Issues Week was held at Hope College. And then later in that year, in 95, Hope College's Dean's Council actually met and responded to that Lesbi Gay Issues Week. And following that, the acceptance of homosexual people was discussed by a panel of pastors of Third Conversion of Human Sexuality, entitled Sexual Ethics and Community, which was held at Hope College.
And so more nationally during that time, in 1996, President Clinton at the time signs a Defense of Marriage Act defining marriage as a union between one woman and one man. In 1996, a visiting scholar at Hope College speaks at Hope College on AIDS in the LGBTQ community. And in 1997, that fall, an openly gay student at Hope College reports that they were receiving death threats and they were beaten. So there is a national tension that's happening right here on our city as well.
So then in March of 1998, there are actually 2 workshops entitled Confronting Homophobia presented at Hope College. And in that same month, a openly gay female Bible study leader at the college was removed from her position due to her sexuality.
And then later in February 1999, the Hope College Campus Ministry presents a Hope College Chapel series called Setting Love in Order, a series on human sexuality. And the key speaker is a former ex-gay minister.
So then in response to that, the following month in March, the Hope College Gay, Lesbian, or Bisexual Equality, otherwise known as GLOBE, they sponsored a presentation by gay minister Mel White. And one important thing to note on this is the Student Congress had actually initially sponsored that talk and then rescinded their invitation. Following that, there was the Human Clothesline that formed in the Pine Grove, and it was to show support for LGBTQ plus students at Hope College. And then a lesbian Hope College student actually spoke on her experiences at the college while she was a student. And then there was also a Hope College Student Committee announcement of a panel discussion on homosexuality that would follow the spring break for that semester.
But then in April, the Hope College Student Congress canceled that discussion based on the divisiveness and not wanting to have that on campus.
So then in the fall, the gay encounter in the Pine Grove was held by GLOBE for the National Coming Out Day. And the National Coming Out Day, for those that are unfamiliar, is a day that gay and lesbian students and their supports really celebrate the ability to be open. And in this case, they celebrated by playing Frisbee, reading, and studying in Pine Grove.
And then in fall in 1999, MetroSource magazine lists Hope College in the top 5 questionable schools for gay students to attend. During this time, more broadly, there was more of a national conversation around people coming out. Ellen DeGeneres came out publicly on a nationalized television special, and it sort of was heralding a new era of gay celebrity power, media visibility, and as obviously, as we've described, continued scrutiny occurred.
And as we mentioned in the beginning, we're going to play some videos. So the first of those videos we are going to continue with right now.
I'm Carol Tanis. And I'm Judy Parr, Carol's sister.
I'm Karen Prince, and my pronouns I use are she, her.
So I'm Kristen Gray, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a clinical psychologist by training.
My name is Jane Dickey, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have lived in Holland, in the Holland area, when coming in 1972 to teach in the psychology department, and then was director of women's studies at Hope College let's see, when did we start that? In around 1992 or something, for about 20 years or so, something like that.
I have been in Holland 54 years at Hope College, which makes me the senior employee among its 900 plus employees.
There were closeted faculty members at Hope College in 1972. They didn't speak much about their own orientation. They just, lived their lives, and I think even in that early time, gay students were apt to kind of sense or figure out, and were likely to find some of those folks who became very, very important to them in that early time. And interestingly, when people think of Hope College, they often think, well, it's very conservative, and so it must have been really terrible for LGBT people since forever. But interestingly, the chaplain who was chaplain when I first arrived knew that there were students who were gay. They trusted him, and they came and spoke with him, and he gave them the key to his house so they could come and meet in his living room. So they had a place where they could meet safely and be together. Later, Jerry Van Heest was chaplain, and he and I in the 80s and 90s went into dorms and did talks on homosexuality is what we called it then, and the Bible, and put a bunch of myths to rest, basically trying to help move students beyond homophobic reactions.
So I grew up assuming, as did other people I grew up with in my conservative evangelical community, that sexual orientation was a moral choice. Some people made bad, reprehensible choices. Over time, as I became a psychological scientist and started reporting on psychological inquiries into sexuality and sexual orientation, I came to understand that sexual orientation is a natural, enduring disposition, especially so, and most clearly so, for males. And so that was the first bit of knowledge that changed my thinking. The second was I came to understand the importance of the human need to belong. We are social animals. We are made for close, supportive, connected relationships to people that care about us. And that's led me to be a proponent of marriage and an annual contributor to the National Marriage Project, which is supporting marriage in the United States, marriage and family values. It just so happens that that need to belong is important for all human beings, not just those of a particular sexual orientation. And so learning about sexual orientation as a natural disposition and coming to appreciate the importance of the human need to belong, and then having my understanding of what biblical wisdom actually teaches about covenant partnerships, all together changed my mind 180 degrees, and I became an advocate for covenant partnerships for all people.
I came to Holland in 1987 for a job at Hope College, and I came from Minnesota, and I thought Michigan would be very similar to Minnesota, and I found out that it's quite different. At least West Michigan is quite different from my home area, particularly around issues of diversity. So I grew up in a very white area, but also a very socially and religiously liberal area. When you grow up in an area, I don't think you know kind of where that area falls on a continuum. And so I moved here and called home to tell my folks some of the things I was experiencing, and my mother said, "Oh, good heavens, you've moved to the 1950s. So it was quite an interesting transition to go from a pretty liberal and progressive area, and to come here and discover, at least in the late 80s, that I was not in that kind of an area. So that was an interesting adjustment for me.
We came to know a man who was working on the scene within the church, in evangelicals, and he had an organization called Evangelicals Concerned. Ralph Blair, who was a psychologist and really a theologian, and he was a counselor in New York City. Dave Myers and I got to know him through his writing, and we invited him to come and speak at Hope College. So we went to it was the same kind of folks. It was Jerry Van Heest, it was Stan Rock, who was at Western Seminary, it was Wayne Bolton in the religion department, and it was Dave Myers and me. And we went to the president and said, "This is what we want to do," because we knew it might be controversial. And he agreed. This was Gordon Van Wylen. He agreed to let this speech happen, have Ralph Blair come and speak. But he said the only way we can do it, will allow you to do it, is if you have a respondent from the religion department at Hope, and you have a respondent from Western Seminary. Okay, we agreed, that was fine. Well, the thing was, Ralph gave this wonderful talk, and in it, a great, very much depth in faith and biblical ideas and the history of how LGBT folks had been treated over the centuries. Afterwards, when the person from Western stood up, he said, "Well, I essentially agree with most of what Ralph said." And the same thing happened with the person from the religion department at Hope. And I know that Gordon Van Wylen, whom I very much admired and got along with, mostly, was seething. I mean, I think he expected that the response from the seminary and from the religion department of the college would be, well, this is all wrong and so forth. But they actually pretty much agreed with what Ralph had said. And all those students are sitting there, like 300 students are sitting there in faculty listening to what's just been presented. And you can't erase that, you can't take that away. So that was a moment where you might have expected someone to say, no, you can't bring that person in. Credit to Gordon Van Wylen, he believed a college should be a place where you can discuss things. So indeed we got to hear Ralph at that time.
So for me, it was very interesting when I first moved here. Folks who later came out to me were not out. And it was interesting that it's not that they didn't just, it wasn't just me, right? So it wasn't, this is a new friend and I'm gonna be careful, which I think is quite common, but they weren't out to anyone. And after I'd been here for 5 or 6 years, there were some kind of difficult things that happened in Holland. And at that point with some crises, including a member of the LGBTQ plus community who died by suicide, people began to come out. I think there was a sense of we have to talk, we have to let people know that we're here. And so it was about that time, I would say the mid-90s, that I started to be more included, or that people came out more to friends and church members and folks that we knew.
As over the last half century, and especially over the last 30 years, there's been a dramatic change in increasing acceptance for gay and lesbian people. For example, in Gallup national surveys, it wasn't very long ago, 20 plus years ago, that only 1/3 of Americans supported gay marriage. Today, 2/3 do. That's just a dramatic change in a very thin slice of history.
If I think about like the late 90s moving forward, Hope has had a series of what I think of as kind of horribly unfortunate events. So some things that happened that were quite harmful to our queer students and faculty and staff. Things that didn't have to happen. There was Mario Bergner was brought in as a speaker, and he is someone who was part of Exodus International and the ex-gay movement. He came and spoke on campus, had very, very tight controls on how anyone could ask a question. It was an incredibly painful speech. Certainly our students were present. There were times when messages were given from our chapel. So I remember being in the balcony, which is where our LGBTQ plus students would kind of gather in those years. And the person who was preaching said, there are the sheep and the goats, and I am asking the goats to leave. For me, there just is never a place for that. There's never a place for that. One of our students was standing next to me, weeping, and the student's mother was there as well. And the student turned to the mom and said, "We have to go now. This man has said the goats have, like we have to go now." And the mom said, "We are not leaving."
In the 2000s, this marks an important time. In February 2000, a Hope College student had their car vandalized for having a rainbow painted on it. In September of 2000, a gay and lesbian film series that was organized by Hope College student Blythe Davis, a year after an independent study was delayed by the Hope College administration, convenes a task force to examine the series as a whole. In February 2001, Blythe Davis's gay lesbian film series, A Life, Not Just an Issue, was held in the Mass Auditorium. And in March 2001, the Gay Straight Alliance for Awareness formed at Hope College in response to the administration's handling of the film.
And then following that, the Hope College Campus Life Board actually denied recognition of the Gay Straight Alliance for Awareness, or GSAA. And then in the fall of that year, it was determined that the GSAA couldn't meet on Hope College's campus. And the task force on homosexuality was formed at Hope College in response to the Campus Life Board decision to deny that recognition for the group. And then in January of 2002, Hope College denied the GSAA, which then switched to the Gay Straight Forum to form as a student organization on campus.
And during all this, in July 2001, there was a local PFLAG chapter that was formed, the Holland Lakeshore PFLAG chapter, founded by members Dawn and Carmen Bergman, Dean and Mary DeRitter, Fred and Joan Hamlin, Nelson and Peg Hart, Jack and Joe Vandenberg. In September 2001, the Hope College Gay and Lesbian Alumni Organization held their first meeting during homecoming. And then in December 2001, Take Back Campus posters with anti-gay statements appeared on campus. And then in April 2002, two LGBTQ organizations were formed, Graces and Globe. They were described and named in the task forces on a report.
So then in June of 2003, at the national level, the US Supreme Court struck down the homosexual conduct law, decriminalizing same-sex conduct. And then the next year, right here in Holland, sort of as a response to all of the negativity that was coming out, we actually had our first ever Pride event in Holland. PFLAG Holland Lakeshore that we just mentioned sponsored author Melanie Morrison, who spoke on telling the truth about our lives at Grace Episcopal Church.
And in fall 2005, Hope College professor Dave Myers spoke about homosexuality on campus, and he published a book, What God Has Joined Together, The Christian Case for Gay Marriage.
And in response to that, in the spring of 2006, Mark Yarhouse spoke in response to Dr. Dave Myers' lecture.
And then in 2006, the Hope College professor Miguel de la Torre wrote letters that were published in the Holland Sentinel that, one, challenged the focus on the family's anti-gay stances, and two, apologizes for how gays and lesbians are treated in Holland. De La Torre was later denied a merit raise at Hope College by the administration, and he chose to accept a job somewhere else. The students organized in support of Dr. De La Torre. And also in 2006, an openly gay professor of art history at Hope College, John Hansen, was refused tenure, despite support by the faculty committee. Additionally, an openly gay Hope College student, Jason Burns, was harassed and his car was vandalized.
So then in 2009, President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. And important to recognize here is who Matthew Shepard was. He was a 21-year-old gay man who was brutally attacked in his town of Laramie in Wyoming. And while this was not something that happened locally here, it was something that the LGBT community knew about nationally and really responded to. And, you know, I think of it myself as, at that time, I was a gay high school student and in a small conservative area, similar to the Holland area and similar to Laramie, Wyoming, where Matthew Shepard lived. And when this happened, I think it really sent a wave of not only the idea that action needed to be taken, but also fear for LGBT people, especially youth, throughout the country. So the Hate Crimes Prevention Act expanded federal hate crimes law to include crimes motivated by a person's perceived gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability.
Then in fall 2009, there was a filmmaker, Dustin Lance Black, that was denied showing his Academy Award-winning film, Milk, at a sexuality forum on Hope's campus. As a response, there was a student organization that was formed called Hope is Ready. The film was then shown at Park Theater instead of on campus. And then in 2010, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed by the United States Senate vote.
When Bill and I moved to Holland in 2003, we became part of the PFLAG Holland Lakeshore group. And at first the meetings were rather small, and I think we had people who came to those meetings, young people, who were talking about their friends, who had a friend that their parents threw them out of the house because they were gay or lesbian. And I think there were people in those meetings that afterwards would look to find out where in the community, and maybe some of them themselves have taken in a person or two whose family had thrown them out. And after that, we got more parents that were coming in saying, my son or my daughter has come out as gay, what can I do? And one of the helpful things that we do, as Carol mentioned, is just to provide support, exchange phone numbers, but we also provided literature about what it means to be gay, and we kept meeting and inviting them to keep coming back and become part of our community.
First of all, when you attend a PFLAG support group meeting, the mission statement is read, and the acceptance from that mission statement is something that makes your heart beat. Because for me, I realize I'm sitting in Holland, Michigan, in Grace Episcopal Church, in a PFLAG meeting around these wonderful moms and dads with their own gay kids, and listen to how they talk about their children. They love them.
Every one of our PFLAG meetings, especially if we have people that have not been to the meeting before, we open with reading someone volunteering to read a welcome statement and another person reading the purpose statement. And so I'm going to read what the welcome statement is for our organization. Welcome to this month's meeting of Holland Lakeshore PFLAG, Parents, Friends, and Families of Lesbians and Gays, PFLAG. It's a national organization that promotes the health and well-being of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons, as well as their families and friends. We offer support to cope with an adverse society, education to enlighten an ill-informed public, and advocacy to end discrimination and secure equal rights. PFLAG provides the opportunity to dialogue about sexual orientation and acts to create a society that is healthy and respectful of human diversity. To make our meetings more comfortable and secure places for everyone, what is said here stays here. Confidentiality is important to all of us for one reason or another, and we must respect each other's rights at all times. We earnestly welcome new members and encourage everyone to attend as many meetings as possible for the benefit of each individual as well as that of the group, because it is when we no longer feel the need for PFLAG that PFLAG needs us the most.
It's like, this can't be happening in Holland, Michigan. That was my biggest revelation, was being around these lovely parents who would do anything to help their child or others' children feel loved and accepted and not strange. So that was the most wonderful feeling.
My name is Krista Anderson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an LGBT affirming psychologist here in Holland. I also facilitate Gender Safe, which is a support group here for the transgender community as well as their family, friends, and allies. I'm a mom of two 19-year-old boys, one who is transgender and one who is cisgender. Coming to Holland in '99 and starting my practice as a new clinical psychologist from Ann Arbor, it was really a shock to me because I didn't really know what I was walking into as far as a lot of the clients that I was serving were pretty guarded and not comfortable being very open in a lot of areas of their life. But particularly I worked a lot with teenagers at the time, and particularly teenagers who were questioning their sexuality or their gender identity, even if they wouldn't often even talk about those issues or feel like it was safe to do so. And so it kind of really started pulling at my heart because I, from an early age and in my training, have always been very LGBTQ affirming and got some specific training in my graduate program, and that was something that I felt really strongly about.
My name is Jill DeYoung, and I prefer they, them, or she, her pronouns.
I'm Owen Beard. I am 21 years old. I use he, him pronouns, and I identify as a gay male.
I have spent the majority of my life in Holland. I was born here, I was raised here, and I still make my home here.
My name is Kelly Palan, and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Jen Adams. I'm an Episcopal priest here in Holland. I've served as rector at Grace Episcopal Church, so had pastors since 2006. But I came on staff at Grace as an assistant in 1994, and the year prior was a seminary intern for the summer here.
When you're young, your world is very, very small. It's your block or your street, your house, pretty much. And then, of course, staying in West Michigan down in Fenville was substantially different. That was not a good place to be anything other than cis, white, straight individual.
It was strange because I and like my family I never thought it was bad to be gay, but I definitely didn't think it was okay for me to be. And I think part of that was I didn't know anyone, and it was never talked about. I think it probably would have been a little bit different if there had been someone who I knew was gay. Yeah.
I felt genuinely called to come and be at Grace Church, and had enjoyed my summer here as an intern. And like I said, I had some friends in Kalamazoo and had met some folks here in Holland. I think it's an absolutely beautiful place to be. I loved the opportunity to be here near the lake and to be in a congregation like Grace. And so I had no questions about coming here. But I did have some questions after a while about staying here, whether or not I could be fully myself openly in the way that I need to be, as both as a priest and just as a human being. So the questions came later than the initial move.
My church, I believe that it was really in good faith, but they adhered to the love the sinner, hate the sin kind of idea when it came to homosexuality, along with most other churches in the area during that time, I think. And I really believe that the people there would have welcomed someone from the LGBTQ plus community, and they would have been warmly greeted. I think they would have invited them to stay for coffee and cookies and encouraged them to participate in Bible study or Sunday school. But I also think that they would have been sort of prayed for or preached at and given this subtle or sometimes not so subtle insinuation that that they were welcome there, but not really as they were, that we were going to try to change them, to make them right, to fix them. They would have been welcomed through the doors, but I think our love would have kind of prohibited their full acceptance.
It was both, I think, Holland being a place where it just wasn't talked about, because I do think there have been gay people here and people part of the community here for so long. I just think a lot of people didn't talk about it and they couldn't really be open. So I think, yeah, Holland, it was a big reason why I didn't have a lot of experiences with people in the community, for sure.
That's its own process too, which I think it is for so many LGBTQ people, that you come out in phases in different pockets of your life, and that was true for me as well. Now, my experience is I'm someone who's lucky in that regard, that almost any time I have come out with family, friends, with the congregation, it's been more than a warm reception. It's been a loving reception, but the larger environment here wasn't like that. So at different points in my time here, there have been different ways in which I've decided how out to be in any given moment. And now 12, 14 years ago, more than that, was, once you're out, you don't come back in. You don't find yourself making the same kind of deep decision over and over again. But for the first 10 years, easy, that I was here, it was a complicated going over and through that question over and over again. And I was working on that in myself too, in terms of claiming my own identity. I was 24 when I came here, 25 when I moved here, so I was still doing my own internal integrating as well.
People didn't talk about it at work, where I worked as a HR professional. It's a very close-knit community, so coming in as an outsider took some time to really navigate the community. What is expected of one moving into the community, how the churches are really an integral part of this community, how family is very integral as well. And then, being an ally of the LGBTQ community, it was really different because there wasn't support for the community like now there is for out on the lakeshore, the community center here. Schools didn't have the support needed for families. Workplaces didn't have it. While they had, they always have the federal laws. They didn't have things such as the ERG group to support LGBTQ communities and their employees as well.
So there's Dustin Lance Black in town, and of course the kids on the Hope College campus are pretty excited. I'm talking about the LGBTQ kids on the Hope College campus who know full well Dustin Lance Black is gay. And they want to have him on campus and to talk. He's a screenwriter, my goodness sakes. Look at the work he's accomplished in his life. They want to learn from him what it's like. How did you get started, and so on and so on. They also wanted a roundtable on discussion for sexuality. Lance, how did you make it in business and in the world, knowing you're gay? So on and so on.
So the film Milk was just about to come out, and to have this young director, that Dustin Lance Black would agree to come to Hope College was quite amazing. Unfortunately, it started with an individual student giving an invitation to a person and then coming onto campus to find support. Typically at Hope, if someone's invited, it's people say we're going to do the invitation, and they get the support together and then they go. So in some ways, this student got kind of caught in this procedural piece, but there was an outpouring of support from academic departments. I mean, you can imagine a director, right? And yet, because of some personal things in his life, not just him identifying as a gay man, but some other things that had been going on in his life, the college said, absolutely not, he can't come. This was another time, I think, when our students were saying, we've got an idea, we've got this great opportunity, and then this piece comes in.
Boom, that's when I'll just say the hammer came down at Hope College, and they weren't going to allow any such roundtable discussion as that.
I'm sad because I think there were people that were hurt in all of that. But in a way, it brought attention, national attention, it brought campus-wide attention, and it brought a coalition of people together even more closely to say this, what happened here was wrong. And this was a case of an administrator at the very top saying, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. And that was his mistake, because he forgot what a college is, what a college should be doing, and it blew up in his face, and I think led to a lot of the kinds of changes that have come about since. Hope is Ready wanted to, it came out of this whole experience, the importance of letting people know that Hope really is ready to have these conversations. And in fact, Hope had been having these conversations in these different pockets, in these different places. Things were happening. But they wanted the campus as a whole to recognize that Hope is ready to invite people to campus. Hope is ready to have a support group, a student support group. So one of the things they wanted to push for was a recognized group. Now, there had always been, ever since John Stout started, there had been a student group. And even when the college was telling its funders and conservative folk, it's not official. Well, I'd like you to know what exactly is official. When they were getting money, there was money coming, the Dean of Students Office that was helping support the actions they were doing. That makes them official to me. But they didn't have that stamp of they're as official as any other student group on the campus, and they did want the stamp, and it was important, but they were still meeting and still discussing and still, having gatherings on campus, even though at one point apparently they were told they couldn't meet on campus. I think what they were told is that they couldn't publicize meeting on campus. Anyway, there were ways to get around it because there already was a support group. Kristen Gray was terrific in that. She stepped forward to provide the counseling center as a place where the students could gather, and she stepped out of their space and gave them their space, and she wasn't there supervising or anything else. So they were looking for the right to advertise their events, the right to bring people to campus to speak, to gather, to be recognized. So they were pushing for those things, and they were saying Hope is ready for this.
So that occurred, and then Hope is Ready was formed. And in January 2010, as a response as well, the community group also formed, and it's called Holland is Ready. So it included the student members of Hope is Ready, but additionally, they held a meeting and over 150 community members came, and it was astonishing, the support that was in the community. And in February, they started organizing, holding steering committees and focus group meetings. And then Holland is Ready and Hope is Ready worked together, and Hope is Ready petitioned Hope College's Board of Trustees to change its policies to become more accepting of LGBTQ students, faculty, and staff.
So then as all of this was going on within Holland is Ready and Hope is Ready, an individual, Reverend Bill Freeman, actually got up at City Council and asked that the council adopt an ordinance barring discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in housing, employment, and education.
And that came from nowhere, it seemed like. But yet, as we've named tonight, it came from a lot of places. Then in July 2010, the Hope College Board of Trustees states why they support fair and kind treatment for people of homosexual orientation. They will not change their 1995 policy that condemns homosexual acts. So in July 2010, a full page ad paid for by the Family Research Council at Request Foods runs in the Holland Sentinel. Among other things, it's listed here. It names that their homosexuals have higher levels of mental illness and substance abuse than heterosexuals. And then it urges readers to not stand in special protection to voluntary sexual behaviors. They're actually harmful to individuals and society.
And then in October of 2010, the Holland Human Relations Commission actually voted unanimously in support of the City Council adding an anti-discrimination language protections for the LGBTQ+ community in its Fair Housing Ordinance, the Human Relations Ordinance, and the Equal Opportunity Policy. And then following that, the Obama administration actually announced that it would no longer support the Defense of Marriage Act.
So then January 2011, there's protests at Hope College Board of Trustees meetings and on campus, and the trustees announced a new statement on homosexuality. That statement reads, "This biblical witness calls us to a life of chastity among the unmarried and the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman." Then in March 2011, Hope College faculty call a faculty forum and distribute 80 to 90 stories of the history of the experience of being LGBTQ as students, faculty, and staff on campus. The document was called the Hope College Stories of Hidden Discrimination, Giving Voice to the Silenced.
And in June of 2011, Holland's City Council rejected a proposal to allow the city attorney to look into amending the city's ordinances and policies to include protections for the LGBTQ+ community. And the vote was defeated by 5-4 after about 4 hours of public comment.
In the midst of this, the day after, a Grand Rapids-based group forms a group called Until Love is Equal, and their idea is to raise moral and economic awareness of equality in West Michigan. Later that month, Gary Glenn vows to support his organization, will financially support a candidate to run against any Holland City Council member that voted against asking the attorney to consider amending the city's ordinance. And then in August of 2011, more than 150 people march on City Hall, demanding that the City Hall and the City Council change its ordinance against to protect LGBTQ people. And in that fall, supportive and affirming Hope College faculty, staff, and students start a Safe Zone sticker training and program where faculty and staff could attend student-run Safe Zone sticker training and learn how to be affirming, as well as provide LGBTQ student support. 82 faculty members went through that formal training.
So then in October of 2011, Bill Freeman, who is the one that originally stood up and asked for the ordinance in Holland, was actually arrested after refusing to leave City Hall after a council meeting where he urged them to expand those protections to include LGBTQ+ citizens. And then following that in November, Wayne Klomparens is elected to Holland City Council, and he ran on a campaign being openly supportive of expanding protections for LGBTQ+ citizens. And despite his opposition being heavily funded by the American Family Association.
And then in fall and 2010, spring 2011, Holland is Ready hosts a public film series about LGBTQ issues in Park Theater downtown. Holland is Ready organizes and creates a 501c3, and they also are awarded the Holland Human Relations Commission of Social Justice for its work. This was after, again, not getting the protections at the city level. They were then awarded the Holland Social Justice Award.
And in June of 2012, the Michigan Department of Civil Rights held a public hearing in Holland to take public comment on the state of expanding civil rights laws to include protections for LGBTQ plus people.
So during this time, Holland is Ready is continuing to organize and raise money. At this one event that they had in Yonkers Garden, there was a fundraiser calling Growing Change in Holland. There was 21 businesses that came out as support of that. And that just showed a large community business support.
And then in December of 2012, Bill Freeman, who first stood up and asked for the protections and then was arrested when he refused to leave. He then was also awarded the Holland Human Relations Commission Social Justice Award. And then in June of 2013, as things continued to grow in the LGBT community and its support in Holland, we had our first, or it was Holland's 10th Pride celebration, but the first ever outdoor Pride festival in Centennial Park on a Saturday afternoon with Park Theater beginning with a happy hour and then featuring a lesbian comedian and a drag show and dancing. So it was a big turning point for Holland to have a very public gathering for Pride for the first time that year.
And then more broadly in the United States, in June of 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional and same-sex couples are entitled to federal benefits. That then results in November of 2013, the Holland Sentinel publishing its first ever same-sex marriage announcement. In March 21st, a judge rules in Michigan that the same-sex ban on marriage is also unconstitutional and violates the equal protection of laws.
So then in 2015, Holland is Ready and the Holland Area Pride Committee collaborated with PFLAG Holland Lakeshore and formed Out on the Lakeshore, which was the first brick and mortar location for an LGBTQ plus community in Holland. Around that same time, the Supreme Court made a decision on same-sex marriage, ruling that it was a basic human right and that same-sex marriage was legal.
And as a result, Hope College extends its medical insurance benefits to same-sex couples. Same-sex married couples. Current health insurance their policy does not cover any gender dysphoria related services. But for the first time, it was a landmark decision by Hope College to extend those rights.
And in August of 2015, recognizing that the trans community did not have the same supports that the rest of the LGBTQ plus community, PFLAG Holland Lakeshore formed a spin-off social and support group called Gender Safe, which is supporting all for equality. And that group was aimed at supporting the trans and gender diverse community. And a few weeks before our 13th Pride celebration in Holland, we had a national and even global tragedy that occurred, which was the Pulse nightclub tragedy that, well, it happened in Orlando. It affected the community across the country and across the world. It was considered to be the worst mass shooting at the time, with 49 dead and another 50 injured. And this was during a time when a lot of things felt hopeful for the community. You know, the Marriage Equality Act had just passed the year prior, and, you know, we were in the middle of the following Pride Month, and then this tragedy occurred.
Then Later, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, announces that the Pentagon is lifting its ban on transgender military people serving. Then, on November 11th, 2016, Holland Pride hosts a One Nation, a demonstration of unity at the Holland Unity Bridge.
And then in May of 2017, Out on the Lakeshore opened its doors at its first location.
And then later that year in November, there was a coalition of 5 students and supporters that wanted to see tangible reform in policy and the intersections of race and sexuality at Hope College. They formed and collected what's called the 95 Stories, based off of the 95 Thesis of Martin Luther. The goal was to advocate for change by collecting stories of racism and homophobia from across the student body that experienced while attending Hope College. And then a month later, there was a student, Joshua Cam and Michael Vasquez, so Joshua was a student at Hope College and Michael was a student at Western. They had been a part of the beginning forms of 95 Stories. They demonstrated a public demonstration during a televised Vesters portion, where they threw leaflets, staged a walkout, and ripped posters from protest hand during a televised portion. The goal was to transition to highlight the ways students had been mistreated. It was at times, though, what was perceived as traumatic because of the Pulse Light nightclub had just occurred. And so many people were very fearful on that day.
So then in February of 2018, Out on the Lakeshore, recognizing its own growth and had an opportunity for a larger location, it moved to the current location at the other end of the building that it was originally at. And that is, of course, where we're at right now.
And then April of 2018, 95 Stories held a Love Thy Neighbor Day, a public demonstration coinciding with the Hope College Visit Weekend, where they handed out cookies, flyers, and passed out information so that people could know what resources and policies were in effect at Hope College at the time.
In June of 2019, Holland's 16th Pride event was the biggest attendance yet. It's estimated that roughly 2,000 people were in attendance, with a lot of various entertainment acts, several vendors, and a lot of community support as well.
And then just a few months later, September 2019, Out on the Lakeshore hires its first director, Jeffrey Sorensen.
And right after that, Hope College established its first student organization recognized by the college that was openly an LGBTQ plus student organization called PRISM. Shortly after that, during the mayoral campaigns, a flyer was distributed by the then mayor of Holland, Nancy DeBoer, and city council at-large candidate Vicki Lynn Holmes at a mayoral forum at Freedom Village that was stating why they would not be voting for protections in housing and employment for LGBTQ plus people, as it would provide special protections for some. This was seen as a momentous and a significant point in the city council and mayoral election, because it's largely what the campaigns were focused on both sides. And therefore, Mayor DeBoer lost that election to our current mayor, Nathan Box, and Vicki Lynn Holmes lost that election to current city council member Lynn Raymond, both who ran on affirming the rights of the LGBTQ plus people in Holland.
And building on that progress, in December 2019, there was a group of over 200 community members that packed themselves into City Hall. It was organized by Jen Adams, myself, and Jeffrey Sorensen, where we petitioned Holland City Council and asked to create a non-discrimination ordinance to provide protections for LGBTQ people in the city of Holland. City Council was presented with a letter from 35 mental health therapists urging it as a public health action that was needed. Council member Myron Trenthui, who had originally voted no for the for the ordinance that was proposed, or I guess the process that was proposed 10 years earlier, made a motion and asked, with support unanimously from the city council, to allocate the city attorney to begin to looking into the ordinance to adapt to non-discrimination. This same one, and at this same point, was what was defeated 10 years prior. And then in March 25th, 2020, that was the date that was set for the city attorney to present their findings to city council, but ultimately that was delayed due to COVID-19.
And at the same time, there was a case that went to the Supreme Court for workplace equality. And one of the people that was part of that case was Amy Stevens, a trans woman who was fired when she came out to her employer in Garden City, Michigan. And she was largely supported by the Michigan ACLU and specifically the attorney Jay Kaplan. And in June 15th of 2020, that case went through and the Supreme Court ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act protects LGBT people from discrimination based on sex. And then in that same month, we had what we called Pride in the Community. It was our sort of virtual and done a different way adaptation of Pride while we were in the middle of a pandemic, where instead of having a big event at the park, we had supportive local businesses highlighted and encouraged people to support them back because they had supported us. And we also had, as we were growing, even in a pandemic, we had our first annual Run with Pride 5K and had over 80 people running and walking in that event.
And then July 8th, 2020, that was when the first rescheduled city council study session meeting occurred, where Ron Van Der Veen, the city attorney, presented his findings and recommended that the city council go forward with a non-discrimination ordinance to provide protections from discrimination for LGBTQ people, as well as other protected classes. Hundreds of supporters gathered outside, publicly, socially distanced and spaced to show public support for the change that the council members were making inside as they went in for their considerations for this record. And then a week later, July 15th, 2020, was the first reading of the new ordinance. And Holland City Council at that time, you voted unanimously to adopt the reading of the Protection Against Discrimination Ordinance that would provide protection and for housing, employment, and accommodations so that individuals would not be discriminated against because of age, race, national origin, color, disability, education, familial status, sex, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, height, marital status, religion, source of income, or weight. Because there was 2 readings required, the second and final reading occurred on August 19th, 2020. Holland City Council, after many, many hours of deliberation, voted in favor 8-1 of adopting a non-discrimination ordinance. It is one of the most comprehensive non-discrimination ordinances in the state of Michigan. During that meeting, letters from support of over 70 faith leaders were provided to City Council. The meeting lasted for over 8 hours. 6.5 of those hours were public comment. Many people were outside until 2 a.m., physically distanced, resting on camping chairs with their phones, listening to what was happening inside. When the decision was rendered, hundreds of people filled the parking lot showing support. Rainbow flags, music, posters were waving. Bleary-eyed people celebrated of what was left and showed support, as this is what we wanted for the future of Holland.
So Holland is Ready had come together in 2009, and we were inspired by the group that was Hope is Ready, that there were 3 Hope students that had begun this group called Hope is Ready. I'd met with them, had supported them, and asked if they minded, actually, if we use the language of Holland is Ready to make this a bigger moment and a bigger movement. And it was, Hope is Ready came to be because of the Dustin Lance Black invitation that was then rescinded by Hope College. And because that situation at Hope College had been told in the Sentinel, there was a lot of public reaction both ways. But it was the first time that I had seen public reaction be relatively even, that there were as many people speaking up in support of having a gay individual come and speak openly at the college as there was people who thought that should never happen. And so just seeing it be more even felt like it was a moment to say, okay, Holland, what can we do? And so we pulled together Holland is Ready in 2009, and that was simply gathering people and saying, what can we do? That was a literal question we started with. From that, then Holland is Ready was born. And it was in some of the meetings of Holland is Ready. The initial meeting had over 100 people present, and were just eager to do something supportive. And it was in those meetings that one of the ideas was to seek a non-discrimination ordinance in the city. And at leadership meetings and sort of huddles around when and how to do that, we weren't in full agreement about when and how to do that. There were some of us that felt like we wanted to be more sure that we could get a majority of council members at least open to the idea before we moved forward. There were others who wanted to go now and do it. And while we were in those conversations, an individual in the community brought it forward. And so we didn't actually initiate the first process of beginning a non-discrimination ordinance conversation in the community, but we immediately obviously jumped in because we were supportive, and now it was out there.
10 years ago, the ordinance is proposed, and at that time too, you had a very supportive Human Relations Commission in the town that was recognizing the leadership of Jen and others, and giving awards for these sorts of things, and that has an influence. They don't have the policy making power that the council does, but it definitely is an indication of where a lot of people in the town were thinking.
So at the time that this individual brought the non-discrimination ordinance forward and presented it to council, Holland is Ready was really focused on education and relationship building in the community, networking in the community. And we shifted at that point, and our primary focus became the ordinance. And now that also involved education and networking and relationship building, but it also became more advocacy as well, and letting people know exactly what was involved with this ordinance, talking to council members, talking to the larger community about this. And at that point, it was council's call in terms of when they would actually take it on, when there would be a vote. We did a lot of work that was door to door, that was, again, getting as much truthful information out about what this was and what this wasn't before the actual vote took place.
With the Holland is Ready working on the non-discrimination ordinance, trying to get that passed in 2011, I believe. I did get involved a little bit with that and did some canvassing. Was not probably my favorite thing to do, being a blind person. It was a little bit challenging going up to people's homes that I wasn't familiar with, but I did what I could and went to the city council meetings. And I remember one of the city council meetings where this was back in the fall of 2011, I believe, where people were sharing their stories. And I remember going with Karen, and it was filled, lots of people there, lots of people sharing their stories. And again, just being shocked at some of the views that people have of, and some of the fear that people have about people who are gay or transgender. And again, feeling compelled like I need to do more. I'm not doing enough.
Well, I'm a relatively optimistic person to begin with. And so even going into this, I knew it would happen at some point. I hoped strongly and was committed to helping it happen at some point. At that point, I knew it would be close. And honestly, going into that evening, nobody knew for sure. That's one of the hardest evenings I've had here in Holland, was the night of the actual vote, because easily over 80% of the people who spoke were in support. We knew we had several council members who were in support, but there were also a few that hadn't shared one way or the other how they were going to vote that night. We had packed the council chambers. There were lots and lots of Hollanders Ready sweatshirts around the room, and surprising voices that spoke up from the corporate world, from some pastors, a range of ages, people we didn't expect who showed up to speak and did. And again, the percentage was so high that the vibe that night was that it had more of a shot than we actually expected. And then the first 4 council members to speak and indicate how they were going to vote, there were 4 who were in favor, and there were only 5 left. And at that point we thought maybe one of them, all we need is one of them. At that point I actually texted Beth, my spouse, at home and said, I think you should come. I think it's gonna happen. And because we only need one more. And then the final half hour, 45 minutes, I don't remember how long it was. At the time it felt like 3 days of listening to the final 5 speak about why they weren't going to vote no was honestly heartbreaking, especially the ways in which it was framed. Some indicating how much they cared and actually did support us, but still voted no. And you know, a couple with reasons why not, that I almost had more regard for than I did those who indicated they were doing something caring. And then just feeling the emotion in the room that night sink, and the grief involved, and disappointment, because we had all gotten our hopes up as we not only moved toward that night, but moved through it.
Yes, I was at the city council meeting, which I recall vividly, which was a 5-4 vote, with a deciding vote cast by the mayor at the end of that long and emotional evening. So, I mean, I was involved just with many other fellow citizens here in Holland in promoting equal justice for all people.
It was the summer between my 3rd and 4th years in college when the first NDO was shut down by the Holland City Council. And I wasn't out at the time. I wasn't even out to myself, but I had been kind of following the newspaper articles and the clips and what was going on, and I was really struck by the words of Pastor Bill Freeman, and how I had never really heard a pastor or anybody of faith advocate for protections for the LGBTQ plus community. And I can remember feeling a sense of safety and security from his words, but not really knowing why. And I can also remember feeling all of that leave when I had found out that the efforts had failed. You know, I just remember feeling all at once that sense of insecurity now rushing in.
Well, that was a great disappointment, but it wasn't a surprise. And indeed, that it came that close in a community that was reputed to be as conservative, socially conservative as Holland was, particularly at that time, was in a sense an indication of things are changing, and they're going to change here, they're changing nationally. We're all part of a cultural tide, and the sea is coming in. And then with time, different people were elected as mayor and as city council people, and that kind of foretold what was going to happen.
But that night also was a significant turning point in many ways. It generated more support, and it meant that Holland was engaging this in a way that Holland had not before, and that we weren't going away. And so it unfolded in a variety of different ways from there forward. But that night was a turning point, not in the way we'd hoped it would be, but in a way that did also crack it open in a way that it just didn't close up again. So one of the things that happened that night of the first vote on the ordinance was that at least one, and probably a couple, if not three, of the council members who voted no that evening did so on the premise that it was not council's work to do, that they did not want to make a decision or legislate, because that's not how hearts are changed or opened. And that's an argument we hear often, and it's an argument often used in civil rights work as well, that this ultimately is about turning hearts. So why would we need ordinances or legislation in order to do the kind of work that is different kind of work? But those two things aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're incredibly complementary, and there's data to show that when laws are changed, hearts can move along, and when hearts are changed, they can help move laws along. I mean, it is a real mutual process. And so I saw that evening as a failure of some council members to own what only they can do. None of us could pass that ordinance, but they could. But what they did was indicate that there's also hearts that needed changing, and conversations that needed to be had, and education that needed to happen, and that was work that we could do. So we claimed it. There were many people in that room that actually became part of the leadership of Holland is Ready, who we hadn't even encountered before, but they saw the work that we had begun. They heard that excuse, frankly, from some council members, and said, all right, we're gonna dig in, and that's what we're gonna be about over the next few years. And so we dove into the work that can only be done relationally, that can only be done over a longer haul, and that is a kind of work that is about changing hearts, opening them, changing minds, opening minds, the work that is telling our stories and listening to other people's stories as well, and finding a place and a way to move forward together.
So I almost didn't move to Holland because there wasn't an ordinance, and I have this really interesting habit of checking local news. And so when I was moving to Holland, or when we were contemplating moving to Holland, I was checking the local news, and I was living in Richmond, Virginia at the time. And so I was really shocked by what was happening in Holland, and actually made me fearful to move here. And I remember telling my husband at the time that if we're gonna do it and we're gonna move there, something's gonna have to change. And so I made a vow that I was gonna work on helping fix the wrongs. And so it was just a weird thing to show up and sort of full circle now to come back to this moment. So 10 years later. But moving to Holland, when I moved here, most of my clients, I was getting a lot of LGBTQ clients that were experiencing a lot of trauma because of what had happened. So it was also interesting. I was reading it before I arrived. I was getting the narrative as it was sort of unfolding, and it was heartbreaking.
Once we got into 2012, Holland is Ready just continued with all its good stuff. I kind of went, to a subcommittee for the Pride planning. And then by 2013, 2014, when we had Holland is Ready and the Holland Pride group doing all their individual work, if you will, as entities, it became like, wait a minute, why don't we, there's strength in numbers, let's come back together under one name? What do you think? So many meetings ensued on that.
Holland is Ready then evolved along with PFLAG and Pride into Out on the Lakeshore, which then created actual physical space that was dedicated to the kind of work that we knew needed to happen in this community.
I'm not patting my back, but I think I offered Out on the Lakeshore and it was chosen. Like I said, there's been so many exciting things happening since I've lived here again. And so it really got into 2015 when this became a plan. Under one name, let's become a 501c3. Another year went by, 2016, boom, we got that 501c3.
Hi, my name is Amber Marie, trans girl. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I had moved down to this area in March 2017 from Muskegon. In November 2017, just before Thanksgiving, I took a chance and walked into the doors of Out on the Lakeshore and got plugged into resources and things I never knew existed here.
It felt like most of the Holland population, it was like, the small portion of the population was actually against it. It was just the fact that no one had done anything about it yet in this 10 years since it happened, since the 10 years ago. It felt like people would be on board with it.
I remember when Jay Peters on the city council ran for mayor, and he ran actually on a platform to create a non-discrimination ordinance, and that LGBTQ rights matter and it's important. And he lost by something ridiculous, like 100 and some odd votes. And it was devastating. And I remember meeting with my clients like the next day, and they were devastated. Sort of as that was, they felt like that was the last gasp. And so I wrote, after that day, I'll never forget, I wrote an email to Jay just to thank him for the hope that he gave our community and what that meant to me, to my clients, and then he wanted to meet with me, and we went and walked, and I started just sharing with him all the stories and all the trauma, and that I will never forget. That meeting sort of lit a fire under me that, okay, it's time. We have to do something. We were so close. It was 190 something votes. There has to be work to be done. And so I just really used my position of power as a therapist, and at that time in the community, pretty well known, started networking my butt off. And I would, like, anyone that would call me back, I would talk to them. And I remember going to like multiple prides and like meeting like Fair and Equal Michigan, and just that's how I started meeting people and connecting with people. And so I did that multiple times, and then finally it seemed, gosh, that would have been the 2019 summer, early summer. I felt like, oh, okay, we're ready. It's time. And I was organized enough and connected enough. There was enough people connected with Jen, and there was enough people and momentum behind it.
In 2019, it looked more and more possible. Like we were approaching a point at which we wanted to bring this to council again, because it would have a shot at getting through. And there were people who ran on this as really one of their primary issues that they would support if they were elected. And there were also a couple of folks who in their run for election or re-election said very clearly they wouldn't support it, and that didn't help them. And so it became clear that the time was right for us to bring this forward again.
When the NDO was reintroduced, I kept my distance at first. I opted not to speak at the council meeting that was held in December. I felt somewhat fragile. I didn't have the kind of armor built up that I felt like a lot of my LGBTQ friends had, because I just didn't have that kind of time behind me yet. I still cared a lot about the opinions of other people. I still was really willing to deny parts of myself to gain their acceptance. And cruel, hateful words still could spiral me into a depression really fast that took a long time to come out of. So I just wasn't strong enough yet to do that.
And it got on Facebook and through Gender Safe that we needed people at City Hall just for a show of support in December. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna be there. And apparently it got out to everybody else too, because the public comment on that night took over an hour and a half. And on that night, I had not intended to speak at all. I had showed up to support you, Jeff and Jen and Sarah, and to support the leaders, but not really say anything. But having been trans myself and listening to someone who was speaking make rather ignorant comments about men in locker rooms and bathrooms, I felt compelled to speak. And I can definitely tell you that everyone in the room, everyone around me was like, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. But, Reverend Jen, who became my pastor, and Ruth Lowry, who was a pastor, just kind of sat behind me, got me calmed down enough to speak, and then I said my piece and sat back down. And I was told I did a good job. I did a good job that night.
My name is Jeffrey Sorensen, and I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the director at Out on the Lakeshore. I started in 2019 as the director, but I have been in West Michigan for about the last 10 years.
So one of the other things that was true in 2019 is that the people who we needed to help lead this process were present, and Jeff and Sarah were significant parts of that, and so were all of the people who had played some role either in the previous run or in getting Out on the Lakeshore to this point, or just different organizations in this community that were already far more accepting and inclusive and wanting to see this happen for the sake of Holland. So it just felt like the stars were aligned for this, and leadership was part of that.
And I really acted as kind of the PR and publicity person for the entire movement. Everything from designing the flyers and the newsletter emails that were going out to being the media contact for everything, and either being interviewed myself or facilitating the interviews that happened. I think that when I first started at Out on the Lakeshore, that was something that was really needed, was someone that had that PR and marketing background, and it's a big reason why I was selected to fill the role. And I think that just translates right into the ordinance as well.
Living through that trauma where you felt powerless was also simultaneously such a loving gift that the LGBTQ community and allies gave each other by when it got uglier, more and more people started showing up outside. And so it did start to feel hopeful. I think on the backside of it, a lot of people, like part of the other role I did is I just had a lot of communication with city council. Like I was just trying to, and as much as I was being in the face of people people that were supporters. I was also just trying to keep an ear to city council and try to understand what was going on their end. And I think there was a few times where I was worried we didn't have the votes. And it went back and forth, it seemed like, just depending on how the wind blew. And that, I think I held the weight in so many ways, and I know so many people did. I just was so worried that it was going to be for nothing. And that was going to be another wound and another thing that all while living in a pandemic, it was really stressful. I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, we lived through a piece of history. I mean, gosh, but it was really stressful. And just the feeling of sitting there in the audience week after week after week and getting berated, both personally, professionally. It has a way of sort of feeling like it erases your humanity.
The price of staying silent was too high. I was too hurt, I was too broken, and there were just too many lives at stake. So at that point, I chose to speak at the council meeting that happened in July about how belonging to the LGBTQ plus community was dangerous and threw us into a game of survival that most other people didn't have to play.
This more recent bringing forward of the non-discrimination ordinance was a time when I was pleased to be able to speak. It felt like it was necessary and good and right to be a little more involved. The evening of the vote, we got the PRISM group, the Hope students, together and walked over to City Hall together with them. We didn't go in, but we were outside, and those students were able to see this gathering in Holland. And our students oftentimes don't leave campus. And so one of the students said to me, all these people are here and they're all supportive and this is Holland? And I said, yes, this is Holland. And then I had a chance to introduce them to some people. The students were amazed to be meeting people from out on the lakeshore, or local pastors, or Hope College alumni who were in the parking lot supporting the non-discrimination ordinance. And it meant a lot to those students to see that this is the community where their college is located. So that was really a gorgeous moment.
I was worried. I still was optimistic, thinking we're gonna win, but I also thought it was gonna be a very close vote. As Mayor Box continued with his speech, though, just his tone and some of the things he said in that very short couple minutes of him talking, I think helped kind of anchor me in, we're gonna win and this vote's gonna go through. I still thought it was gonna be a very close vote. I was shocked when I was listening to all of the council members say yes or no, and there was more yeses than I thought there would be.
It's time for us to stand up. It's time to invite our neighbors, all of our neighbors, to sit beside us. It's time to call them by name, to recognize and acknowledge who they are. It's time to bring people together. It's time to let them know that they truly belong and that we are glad that they're here. Why wouldn't we? It's time to protect the rights of everyone equally. One standard, one rule, one ordinance, one Holland. Holland, let's send a clear and unequivocal message. We love our neighbors as ourselves. We appreciate the gifts that they bring to our community. We protect the rights of everyone equally, and we celebrate the value of everyone that calls Holland home, because this is Holland. One Holland, and we all get to live here. Kathy, please call the roll.
Corbin,
Yes.
Hoekstra,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Byrd,
No.
Peters,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Arnshorst,
Yes.
Mayor Box.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We are not done this evening.
On September 9th, 2020, the Holland non-discrimination ordinance went into effect. In December 2020, Jeff, Jen, and I were awarded the Social Justice Award by the Holland Human Relations Commission. And then in January 2021, PFLAG Lakeshore Holland decided to dissolve as a chapter, but they joined out on the lakeshore to form a family and friends group. Oodle's organization everything became under one umbrella. Gender Safe, PFLAG is now here at Oodle.
And then just earlier this month, the City of Holland Mayor Nathan Box proclaimed June as LGBTQ plus Pride Month in Holland, which was the first ever proclamation affirming and acknowledging the LGBTQ plus community here in Holland. So that's really the work that has gotten us here, but we also want to acknowledge that there is so much more work to be done, and there always will be. We do thank you all for joining us. We apologize that it went later than planned. However, there's so much history that to condense it to an hour and a half, we learned just wasn't possible. So we thank you for sticking around with us through this whole presentation.
And we actually encourage you to think about your own reflections of the history that you have lived through. And we're still in it. We're still in this history. We're still writing it. And so ways that you can get involved in our community to make positive change. We're continually growing out on the lakeshore, and we need support, both financially and time and energy and efforts and ideas. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's important. The work isn't finished yet. We now get to be visible, and that's the cool part. We get to live here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey and Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing this incredible history with us. And you're right, there is so much more that needs to be done. I'm just going to share a few of the comments in the chat. So many people have worked so hard, very powerful history, her story, their story. Thank you. Thank you for this informative program. The timeline really shows how far Holland has come after decades of a roller coaster of some ups and many downs. Many hearts and minds have been changed. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. This was beautiful and important. Thank you. Thank you for all the work you've done for presenting this. Thank you for producing this program, and another thank you. So I want to just add to that. So thank you again to both of you for sharing so much of this, and especially all of those personal stories in the video and those testimonials. I mean, they're incredibly moving. So we just appreciate putting all of this together and being a part of this evening with us. So I do have a couple of questions. So I'm going to make this really quick. These were actually submitted before the program. So I just want to share them because I want to make sure we get to that. So the first question was, I've heard that there was once a raid on a queer party in Holland by the Holland Police Department. Is that true? I think it ended with a Christian school teacher losing his job. So I don't know if you know this bit of history, if that is actually true.
I do believe that is true. And our research and what we were finding is the hard part is the police reporting and the history. And I do believe that may have ended in a suicide. And so that's part of what Jeff and I hope to even continue is there needs to be more research and more, I mean, we barely touch the surface. There's we could make a Netflix documentary out of this, I think. And it speaks to this is the reality of what people were living in Holland, is in fear, because there were raids, and then there were people could lose jobs, lose lives. And so as far as I know, that is true. And I hope that we continue to do the research to bring all these things, because this is a part of the history too.
Great. So our last question that was submitted earlier was, how did each of you become so awesome? Which I think is a fabulous question. And also, what do you wish everyone in town knew? Which I think is a really big question to end on, but I think part of what that would be is what you've shared with us, but if there's anything else you would like everyone in town to know about.
So, I mean, to the first part, I say we're all probably awesome in our own way, but it's easy to do this work when you have a supportive community, or it's easier. It's never easy, but also supportive leaders by your side. So, you know, when we were going through the non-discrimination ordinance work, having Jen Adams and Sarah right there with me made the work a lot easier. And so I say, if I'm awesome, it's because I had awesome people next to me. Yeah. And as far as, you know, what I would like people to know, it's really just driving home that sentiment of there's always work to be done. And it doesn't mean you have to be part of the LGBTQ plus community to do that work. Oftentimes, you know, we see it with PFLAG Holland Lakeshore that formed over 20 years ago. They really set the stage, and it was a bunch of parents and other family members primarily that really set us up for the success that we had in the years following their formation. So oftentimes it really is the combination of both the LGBT community and just allies coming together.
Yeah, it takes all of us. That's what I was going to say. That's what I'd say. And the awesome comment is exactly the same. It takes all of us, and the work doesn't stop. And we can celebrate along the way. And so I think it's been interesting to live through this. This presentation provided an opportunity for me to reflect on it. I think we've all lived in survival mode this past year. I hope that we also get to celebrate, you know, and we will this month and this whole summer with Pride. But it's just, we have to continue to celebrate and remember, because that's going to anchor us to keep doing the work for the future. So it takes all of us.
Great. Thank you again. I think that is a perfect place to end this incredible conversation that we had this evening. And thank you again so much for your time. And thank you everyone for being with us this evening. We had a great turnout. We're so glad to have you here. I see people clapping. That's wonderful. So please continue to join us for future programs. And again, thank you, Sarah and Jeffrey. We really appreciate everyone's time, and everyone have a great evening. Thanks so much.